everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the other games that I discussed in my recently in my top 5 time travel based board games. And wait, seriously? Still? Okay, maybe next week, but at some point you'll know what I'm talking about. But either way, this is another great game that does time travel extremely well. And this is one that is actually a board game, unlike Chrononauts. And in this particular case, it's one that actually came off of Kickstarter, though unfortunately I didn't get it off of Kickstarter. But the game itself is Legacy Gears of Time. Now, Legacy Gears of Time is a really interesting and very unique game. I love the way that it works because it reminds me of games similar to like a Civilization and things like that, where the whole point is that you are literally trying to build up technologies. But the way that you do it is by actually traveling back in time and establishing the starting points for these different technologies. And like I mentioned earlier with my Chrononauts video, one thing that I really don't like about a lot of time travel games, actually also in my top 5 I mentioned this, one thing I don't like is that if you have over complexity of a game like this, then it can completely ruin the idea and the feeling of time travel, because if you have like the little nuanced rules and things like that, then it can be so nearly impossible to really realize what everything means, how it affects everything else, and all this kind of stuff. Legacy Gears of Time really does that very well, simply by the way that the basic game mechanics work. The idea is that you play it in rounds, you're traveling backwards in time, trying to establish these new technologies and sort of keep them alive as well as you go. And then at the end of the round, everybody is sort of forced back to the present, and everything just sort of scooches forward, and you know, time presses on. And I think that's something that's very important with games like this, is you need to have a fundamental rule of how the time travel mechanic functions. If you've got something where you're going back, forth, left, right, up, down, all this kind of stuff, it can boggle people's mind exceedingly easily. Whereas with this one, it's great because you only have the backwards travel, which not only gives you a great strategic element, but it also means that in terms of the game mechanics, it's something that's so much easier to keep track of and how everything is working and relying on one another. It's absolutely a great game. I'm very excited for it. Like I said, it's relatively simple to pick up and play. It plays 2 to 4 players in about an hour and a half or 2 hours, so it's not terrible. And one thing that, again, I don't mention a lot in most games, but I do love the art for this. It's kind of like almost a cartoonish steampunk. You'll see what I'm talking about when I do my my demo for it, but that's really the best way I can describe it. And it's kind of cool. It's a combination of like colored pencil steampunk is really the best way I can say it. But either way, with that, I will stop yammering on and just get right into what this game is similar to. As far as similarities for Legacy Gears of Time, there really aren't a whole lot, but the one that I already mentioned, Civilization, is a good example. Really anything where you're establishing technologies and you have things that rely on one another is a good indicator of exactly what the end goal for this game is. The idea is that you want to have, you know, the very basic, like you want to have fire, you want to have basic tools, you want to have writing, you want to, and then you go to paper, and then you can go to like banking and etc., and just moving down the line. That's really what it's all about. It's about establishing the solid base upon which you can expand. Other than that, because it's got a time travel mechanic which is relatively unique, there aren't a whole lot of other ones. But I mean, science and technological advancement is pretty much everywhere. You've got Eclipse, you've got Civilization, like I already mentioned, Twilight Imperium. Obviously, it's got that on a much smaller part of the game, but a fairly large scale still. And that's really what you're talking about. And the other really obvious one for this is something like Chrononauts, because with Chrononauts you're doing something sort of similar, just in the context of time travel and being able to move around and change history and things of that nature. But other than that, the real linchpin, so to speak, for this game is the idea that you are really trying to build up technological prowess and making certain that everything that you need is there so that you can build, you know, your satellites or whatever it happens to be. So it is difficult to get a real similarity, but I hope that sort of gives you a general idea of what it is. But with that, to get you a very good idea of what this is, I'll go right on ahead into my demo of exactly how to play. Alright everybody, we're here and we're just about set up and ready to play Legacy Gears of Time. I've got it set up for only 2 players so I can keep things moving a little bit because I want to go through a full round so you can see the entirety of gameplay. You can see that the basic setup is relatively simple. Every player will get one of these character cards. On one side it's got an image that represents the character or characters that you're playing, and on the other side you get a little blurb about him, her, or them, and then you also have a pursuant technology that this particular person desires to have. If you do, then you get a bonus at the end of each round. You also have some information about the different actions you can take, and then a place to put your influence pool, which are represented by these cubes here. So for the basic setup, we've got the draw pile, which is all of the different cards that we can draw from. We've got these 2 gears representing the turns and then the rounds respectively. We've got the player order right here, and then we've got victory point trackers up there. Down here on the bottom, this is the main timeline. As I said, this is set up for 2 players, and you can see that there are dots on this line right here, 2 dots, 3 dots, or 4 dots, depending on the number of players you have. And then we've got this big giant cardboard piece representing the present day, so to speak. So the way that this game progresses is very simple. Players take turns performing different actions. Each turn you have, you can perform up to 3 actions. You have to perform 3 actions. And there are several different things that you can do. You can move backwards through time any number of spaces. So that means that moving here to step 1 is the same as moving here to step 4 in this particular case. You can also establish a technology, which are from the cards, which I'll show you in just a little bit. You can also influence a technology. Once you have influence pools of cubes, you'll get those at the end of each round, depending on what they are. You can also draw 2 cards and keep 1, or you can, technically as a free action, you can play a fate card. So essentially, the drawing 2 cards and keeping 1 ends up being sort of the default for whatever leftover thing you have. The way that this works as far as establishing technologies is very similar to something like Race for the Galaxy, where you have to discard X number of cards in order to place down a specific one. So just to give you an idea of what these different cards look like, here is an example of a fate card. This is one of the special action cards that, again, it does not require an action, but you do have to play them on your turn. And most of them are fairly self-explanatory. You just are able to do whatever it says. In this case, you can remove a dependency from any technology. Now, what does that mean? Well, for example, we've got railroads right here, and you can see the dependency is in the box right below it where it says it requires the combustion engine. The combustion engine in turn requires the wheel and fire. The idea being that if railroads are successful, whoever is sort of controlling the combustion engine, so to speak, will also get points for it. The way that these cards work is the number on the left side with the little gear looking thing around it represents the number of cards you have to discard in order to build this. And the number on the right side in the crown represents the number of points you get if you are influencing it at the end of the round when the points are categorized, and assuming that it's successful. In order to be successful, you have to have all of the prerequisites. There are a lot of cards in here that are what are called basic or fundamental. So for example, we've got basic tools, which is a fundamental technology. These are always successful. You don't really have to have anything on them for them to be functional and capable, but they are very important because, again, everything builds off of them. Here's another example with philosophy. It only has a single prerequisite, logic, which is a basic or a fundamental as well. But if you don't have logic, you can't have philosophy. So it's kind of cool, and I like the sort of abstract way that the cards are associated with one another. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's well done in the context of it makes sense for what's going on with it. Now, the way that the traveling works, again, you can only travel backwards in time. You can only go from the present day back. But what you may notice is that on this this track here, we've got the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and 4. What those represent is the number of technologies that each of those sections, so to speak, are able to hold. So the one that's closest to the present day is only capable of supporting a single technology. After there's a technology there, then you can't put anything else on it. And then same thing for 2, 3, and 4. So one thing you can immediately see is basically what's going to happen is as the rounds go on, the present day is going to move forward, and this bar will as well. As it moves forward, we add on these little markers right here. So for example, right here, let's scoot this back just a smidge so we get it lined up. So there we have 5, and then we've got 6 right there. So it increases the number of technologies you're able to have as you move the present day forward, which is nice, and it's something that you can plan for, but initially there's only so much that you can do. So obviously the more prerequisites you have, the later on in time you're going to want it. Now that said, there are a couple of basic rules regarding that. You cannot have 2 copies of the same technology in a single file. So like right here, for example, you couldn't have 2 railroads in this one because they can't coexist there. And also, if you have a technology that is successful earlier on, so if you had railroads right here and then railroads right here as well, and this particular one was successful, it couldn't be at this time, but just as an example, if you had it right here and it was successful, then the one that's in the next column would go away because it was essentially done in age earlier. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Everybody has a supply of cubes which represent influence, and we each get 6 cards to start off with. So I'll just go ahead and get started, show you guys how it works and the basic level of play. All right. Now, one thing that I did forget to mention is that if you have, whether you have 2, 3, or 4 players, then anybody who is after the first player gets additional cards. So in this case, the second player, blue, gets 1 extra card. If there were 3 players, the second and the third player would get 3 cards or 1 extra card, and then the 4th player actually gets 2 additional cards, just to sort of help them kickstart everything that's going on. And this represents the turn order, the initiative order. That's determined later on by the amount in your influence pool, but for the first time, you either decide it randomly or you just figure out some way to do it. I honestly don't remember how they do it in the instructions, but for this first part, red has the initiative. But here's the thing, looking at red's hand, they've got a lot of fundamental capabilities. They've got a lot of these random cool little things here, but the problem is that we've got a full round, which means that there's 12 total actions because there's 4 turns of 3 actions each. And the thing is that since you can only move backwards, it can be very, very difficult to, or very easy rather, to end up sort of shooting yourself in the foot and making you not able to do what you need to do. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to draw cards twice. So draw 2 and keep 1. Let's see. Ooh, this is tough. We'll take that one, the tools. Discards are always face down because we're all super geniuses and we are able to count how many of each type of card there are. So if we know how many have been discarded, then we know exactly how many are left. For the second action, we'll go ahead and draw 2 again. Look, we've got Spaceflight and the Analytical Engine. Oof, that's probably just going to end up being fodder for discards. We'll go ahead and take them. And then for the third action, move back 1. Now, blue is going to do basically the same thing because, again, just not trying to waste some amount of turns here and just trying to gather enough cards to really start to establish stuff later on. Okay, so those were the two draws. Now, here's an interesting thing with blue. They actually have a special card here, Time Folds Around Us, which allows you to move a player forward a time frame, which means that they can go back and get started pretty early here instead. Sorry about that. I drew too many cards. 6, 7, 8. Yay, 8. In addition, this particular character, the Maggie and Sam, their pursuant technology is law. So they're definitely going to want to establish this. So what they're going to do is they're going to take their last turn and do a big move back. All right? They'll be able to use that fate card to bump themselves up at least a little bit so that they can keep establishing, but they just want to make certain that they get some of those fundamentals up. Right? So that's the end of the turn. So we scoot that up right there. Actually, let me make certain, because I always get those two confused. One of them is the round marker and the other one is the player turn marker, and I constantly get them backwards. And I did. I got them backwards. All right. Player round. Okay, so now we're on the second player turn here. So it's Red's turn. They're going to go for something that is not fundamental, but not ridiculously crazy. All right, here we go. So they have the printing press. Now the printing press only requires writing, which is a fundamental technology. So they're going to go back one as one action, place it as a second action, which will cost them 2. I'm just going to leave the cards face up because it's easier for me. Obviously, you don't want to do that while you're playing. Discard the microscope and the space flight to pay for it. And then whenever you establish a technology, you take 2 cubes or however many cubes you discarded and you put them on top. And now that is owned. So that was the second action for Red. Okay, establishing that. And then go ahead and do the same thing. Draw 2 and then put them down. Okay, not bad, not bad. All right, we'll take refrigeration and get rid of logic. And get rid of philosophy. Okay. Another important thing to note is in the current timeline where Red is, only 2 technologies are allowed. So we're already halfway there, unfortunately. Okay. Now it's Blue's turn. So the first thing they're going to do is establish law, which is a cost of 2. So they're going to get rid of these 2 right here. And put 2 of their cubes. And then they're also going to establish the wheel at a cost of only 1. They're going to get rid of writing, in part because they see that Red needs writing for the printing press, so they're like, bah, ha, 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 you can't have it, right? So there's their second technology, and then as a free action, they get to use Time Folds Around Us, so they move forward 1, and then as their last action, they'll draw 2 and keep 1. All right, and they'll take electricity. Okay, so that's the end of the second player turn. Right there. And now it's time for Red again with a whole bunch of random stuff. So Red actually has writing and then several other fundamentals. And it's still only about halfway full. So what are we going to do? We'll go ahead and take a pretty big risk here. And we'll head back right here. Establish writing for a cost of 1. So we'll get rid of refrigeration. All right, so that's the second action because we moved, we established, and then we'll go ahead and establish logic because everybody loves logic. Logic is awesome, and that costs 2. Okay. Now, do keep in mind that well, it's not really relevant right now, but if you establish a technology later on than it already is, then it won't work, and it'll have to be gotten rid of. Okay. So Blue is going to go ahead and put down electricity, throwing away the wheel because the wheel was already established. Now, this section right here is full because it can only hold 3 technologies, so that one is done. We've got your next established technology action this turn may exceed the technology capacity by 1. That would be useful if we had any cards. So go ahead and draw a couple of cards. See what's here. Law and logic, both fairly useless. So just take one of those. Draw 2 cards again. Mining and religion. Interesting. Take religion because it's more likely to help. All right, so that's the end of that. Now, this is the last turn round for this particular round of the game. So let's take a look here. We've got cartography and the combustion engine. This is unfortunate because cartography requires writing, which would be nice. But since red is in the area where writing was established, we can't put this in there because you can't establish something in the same one where it's required. It has to be later on. So both of these are, well, the combustion engine is slightly less worthless. Okay. So then we'll take 2 more. And what do we got? Got flight and refrigeration. Flight we'll get rid of. And then for the third action, well, we can't establish anything, unfortunately. Bummer. Major bummer. So we'll just take cards again. Can't establish anything because it's full. Ooh, advanced sciences. That is Dr. Tilton's pursuant technology, advanced sciences. So definitely hanging on to that. Just because you never know when you're going to be able to use it. Okay. Now it's time for blue's turn. So they'll go ahead and draw up for 1. They got basic sciences and electricity. Electricity is already done, though, so they'll get rid of it. So that's 1 action. Oh, second action, and then third action will be establishing basic sciences for 2. Right? And then you get 2 cubes. So that's the end. That is the end of the player turns, which means that it is also the end of the round. What happens at this point are several things. The first thing is you check to make sure that everything is okay, that all of the technologies actually occurred and were successful. If any technology is unsuccessful, they get this little pentagonal marker, pentagonal, whatever. It's 5 sides, and it has a big X on it. The only one right now that would get this would be the printing press if writing wasn't in play, but it is in play, so we don't actually put it in there, right? So we go ahead and do the scoring, right? So red gets 4 for the printing press plus 2 for having writing because red has the most influence on the writing as well. So they go up a total of 6 for that. Whoops. Off the board is technically 0. It's unfortunate, not all of them are labeled. Okay, so that's for the printing press. And then for owning writing, red gets another 2 just for having that. For logic, they get another 2 as well. Okay, and then blue doesn't own anything that is dependent on anything else, but they get 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, plus they've got their pursuant technology, which is law, so they get an additional 2 points for the legacy. So that's a total of 11 for blue, and they just go right there. Now, because it's the end of the round, everybody goes back to the present day. Present day is moved up. This is moved up along with it, and we now have the ability to store 5 technologies at the very end one. In addition, we now start setting up influence pools. The way that this works is whoever has the most influence in any technology will take one of the cubes from that and put it in their influence pool on the card. So for example, red will get 1 on their pool from that, 1 from writing, and 1 from logic for a total of 3. And this one goes back to the supply. Blue gets 1, 2, 3, 4. And then these other 2 go back to the supply. Just like that, right? Now this will change the turn order because red only has 3 versus blue's 4. So they will switch the turn order, and now blue will get to go first on this first turn of round 2, right? And that's the basic progression of the game. At the end of the 4th round, the 4th time you go through the player turns, it will signal the end of the game. You add up total points, and you see who wins. But those are the real basics for this game. There's really not a whole lot else. The only other thing now that we've got an influence pool, the way that that works is it's a separate action. And what would happen is, say I'm red, I would go back here. And then as an action, I can place any number of influence tokens from my pool on any technology. So I could take 2 and put it on the printing press. I could take all 3. I could take just 1. Doesn't matter. But at this point, what could happen is if red puts down 1, then blue can come back and take 2 from their influence pool, and now blue owns that instead. So they would get the points instead of red. So it's just another layer of strategy, another potential action that you can take, and you can tell that just, I mean, even right now, how things can increase very, very quickly and very quickly get crazy. One of the most difficult things is figuring out what works and what doesn't work. In other words, using these little markers right here. For example, if red were to put down advanced sciences, that's great, and it only needs basic science. But once you start getting to some of these other ones, like for example, refrigeration, which needs agriculture and basic tools. If either one of those is not out and unsuccessful, then that means the refrigeration is not successful either. Excuse me. On the back of the instructions, there's actually a nice little sort of map that shows you what all of the different influences are for the various technologies. It's not exceedingly helpful just by the way that it's done, but at the same time, it can give you a general idea of what you need. So, for example, if you look at electricity, it's got to line up to radio, which goes to the internet, and then it also goes up to the analytical engine, which is also required for the internet. So if anything that the analytical engine requires, for example, which are the printing press, philosophy, and electricity fail, then the internet would also fail. You know, I mean, it's just, it can get very ridiculous very fast. As I said during my little intro, it's something that's very cool because you really can see how the technology tree can expand out and just get all of the little branches and everything, very similar to games like Civilization and the like. So I really enjoy this game. It is a ton of fun. You can see it can move relatively quickly, especially once everybody really knows how they're doing, or what they're doing rather. With more players, it's obviously going to take a little bit longer, but that is pretty much it. There is an expansion for it, which I do not own, unfortunately. That was part of the Kickstarter, as I mentioned, but just having this as it is right now is still very cool. I love the way that it works. It's an absolutely great game. I hope that you enjoyed my little demo for it. So we're going to go right now into the pros and cons and also just some general conclusions. Well, I hope that you enjoyed my demo for how to play Legacy Gears of Time. As I mentioned, it is a very, very interesting game and surprisingly strategic. When you first look at it, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of cool. But then when you really start playing and realizing that you've only got this backward motion, not to mention you've got the different cards that you can play, the special cards and things of that nature, it becomes something that really starts to sort of not really get to you, that's the wrong phrase, but something that you really have to start thinking about. But as always, there's always pros and cons for it. So the biggest pro for me is, again, this is one that does time travel very well. I like that while you're still thinking four-dimensionally, you can think of the fourth dimension in... You think about it in both directions, but you think of establishing it in one direction. And what I mean, again, is the fact that you can only move backwards makes not only strategic value added to the game, but also the fact that you have to realize once you're done, then you're done. And it means that you have to plan ahead a little bit more, all this kind of stuff. It really just comes down to the strategic nature, but I believe that being able to travel both forward and backward would just completely break the game, and it wouldn't make any more sense, and people would get even more confused than they already do. Some of the other pros I mentioned earlier in the video in my introduction, that I really do like the art of this. And again, it is something I don't really mention very often, but it's cool. I think it really fits, sort of cartoony, but still serious type of thing. I think that it's just absolute perfect fit. And so that's a really big pro for me. As far as the cons are concerned, I think this is something that a lot of people might be immediately turned off by when you mention that you're talking about time travel. Simply because people can get like really freaked out, and they're just like, oh, well, I don't do the time travel thing, it's too confusing, it doesn't make any sense, this kind of thing. Which is totally understandable, again, because not only have many people probably not even played time travel based games, but if they've watched movies or TV shows that involved time travel in some way or another, then they know how confusing it can be, where you're constantly either having to jump back and forth between two different timelines so you know what's going on in different places, or worse yet, you're in a single timeline and things are being affected by a different timeline that you can't see, and you're just like, wait, what, why did that happen, what's going on? And you feel sort of like unfulfilled, for lack of a better term. But other than that, one of the other cons is that it is a more complex game, so it's not really something that you could just have people jump in with unless they're relatively familiar with how games work. And again, that the whole thing with the influence system, making certain that everything is being built up correctly and things of that nature, can take a decent amount of getting used to. But once you're there, after one playthrough, you should be able to at least have a good general idea of what's going on, how it works, etc., etc. So it shouldn't be too bad. But like I said, there's really not very many bad things about this game. I absolutely love it. The one thing is, I'm sad I didn't get it off of Kickstarter because I didn't get more of the characters, which would have been kind of nice. But other than that, it's a wonderful game. I highly recommend it, as I do with all of the games that I review. But thank you so very much for being here. Do watch out for that top 5 video, because hopefully it'll be intersecting you guys here at least relatively soon. But for now, thank you very much for being here right now, and I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you either next time or last time, whichever it happens to be. Take care until then. Okay, look, I am so sorry that this happened again, but I promise that next week it'll be the right video. Don't worry. But with that, thank you so very much for watching my review and gameplay demo for Legacy Gears of Time. I hope that you enjoyed it. As always, please put any thoughts and comments into the comments below. Whatever you want to say, any games that you'd like to see me review or anything else. In addition, you can see some of my other videos linked at the top of the page. And if you want to see more from me, click on the big giant subscribe button. But with that, thank you very much again for watching this. I will see you next time and last time.